um, jumping in.
Good. Why don't I take a few minutes now?
Okay.
It is noon, and I'll just speak a few minutes about Global Innovation Institute and welcome those who are here. And that'll take a few minutes. And
Take
then
your time.
that I'll move into the introduction. And once I'm through with the introduction, I'll hand it off to Professor Kennedy.
Okay, that sounds great.
And at that point, when I hand it off to you, you'll want to share your screen with us again.
Right, I'll wait on until then.
Okay, so everyone who's online now, welcome to our webinar with Global Innovation Institute. I am Anthony Mills, the Executive Director of Global Innovation Institute. It's a pleasure to have you here today. We look forward to hearing from our presenter, Professor Justin James Kennedy, whom I'll introduce in just a minute. But I'm glad you're here, and to give you an update a little bit about the Institute. The Global Innovation Institute is the world's leading professional certification and accreditation and membership organization in innovation. The Institute's been around for a good number of years now, and there are people who are certified all over the world. We have providers, our authorized innovation providers and authorized training providers all over the world. We've recently launched an operations center in a training center program in the Middle East in Abu Dhabi called the GNI MENA Center. All of the GNI materials are now available in Arabic as well as English. So a lot of things happening at the Institute, a lot of programs being accredited, organizations being accredited, individuals being certified to promote corporate innovation inside of businesses. So the Institute is doing a lot to very much promote that. This today is what we hope will be a series of ongoing angles around business innovation to those who are trying to learn more about innovation, master more insights about innovation. So I'm excited to have all the people who are joining us. So at this point, I'm going to introduce our presenter today. And after I introduce him, I'm going to give the floor to him and let him make the presentation to us. So we have today with us Professor Dr. Justin James Kennedy. And Dr. Kennedy is a thought leader in organizational neuroscience in England, a licensed healthcare professional in Dubai, and an executive coach based out of New York City. His first book is called Brain Reboot, A Change of Mind to Change Your Brain. And this is his book. This book was launched in 2019, and it describes how his corporate career was interrupted following a motorbike accident, leaving him in a coma and on a very long road to recovery. Today, Professor Kennedy is a globally recognized professor of neuroscience. He leverages his extensive business experience with an emphasis on accelerating performance and delivering innovative solutions for companies like Shell, Toyota, Xerox, and many other businesses. Based on his own story and the journey to reboot his brain, Dr. Kennedy helps aspiring people to become innovative and more creative in life and work. He always says, a change of mind will change everything. And so with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over now to Professor Kennedy. And Professor Kennedy, if you want to share your screen with you, I'll give you the floor.
Anthony, thanks so much for the warm welcome. I'm really excited about this conversation that we're going to have. I prefer to have conversation rather than presentation. So Anthony, if I can ask you a favor, to interrupt me a lot, would that be okay?
I can try.
Okay, because what I find is that if there's a dialogue going on, it makes the presentation a much more, more organic, more authentic. And when things are online, there's nothing better than having that visceral experience. So if that's okay, would you mind doing the overview of the presentation? I'm just kidding with you, my friend. Let me get cracking with this. So, just if you can have your chat box open in about 10 minutes or so, I'm going to need you to do some things, if that's okay.
So everyone should have their chat box open.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
But file view. Hold on, it's not coming up. Just give me a second.
Sure.
I'm going to go into presentation mode. Oh, here we go.
All right, and you need to share the screen.
Yeah, great. So I'm now going to go share screen. And it should be this one. Okay. So you've got that up on your side. How easy is that to see? Is that okay?
It looks great. It looks great. Excellent.
Okay. Okay. Well, Anthony, please don't forget to interrupt me consistently. Okay. It'll make the presentation a bit more organic and enjoyable. So let's see how we do. Okay, so everybody, I'm Justin, and I'm hoping to have a fun conversation with you. Anthony is going to, what can we say, Anthony? Can we say coordinate, conduct, mediate, manage the presentation? But anyway, whatever we call it, the presentation is going to be around how the brain is innovative, creative, imaginative, all of the above or none of the above. The way that this presentation is looking is about what do you need to look in to the brain to find those light bulb moments. And as the slide says, the aha moments are preferred when the brain is prepared. Aha happen when preferred brains are prepared. And I hope that is giving evidence of me being prepared today for this presentation. So here's the brief agenda. We've got about half an hour. Anthony, how long we got?
We've got 30, 45 minutes, however long you'd like to take.
Okay, well, I booked out an hour. So let me go for 30 minutes on the presentation, and then let's have some open questions or whatever sounds right.
Yeah,
But here's the little agenda. Yes?
20 minutes for Q&A.
Yeah, well, let's see how much we need. I'm happy to do it either way. Okay, so in this regard, the agenda's got 3 sections. Looking at how empathy, creativity, and storytelling are all functional, important parts around the application of neuroscience. So for those who are interested in the neuroscience, I'm not a neuroscientist per se. I'm a behavioral neuroscientist or an applied neuroscientist, which means I don't necessarily dig into the brain or look at the fMRI data directly, and I look at the behavioral applications and the influences. So it's looking at what happens in the brain and how that influences your hands and your movements and your behavior. So I'm all about action rather than academia, even though I have some academic responsibilities. So those are the 3 areas. Anthony, is that pretty clear? Can I crack on, or should I explain them a little bit more?
No, I think they'll all become very clear as you explain them all.
Okay, very good. So let's get going. So the first part is my amazing artistic skills, Anthony. I hope you like the little genie icon in the GI icon of the little man in the top right-hand corner. I had some fun putting some animation together. Okay. So I hope that's cute. So let's speak about empathy for a second. And the first thing to do about empathy is to understand the neurology of where feeling positive towards other people, even to yourself, doesn't happen. Because where you know what isn't happening, you can know where to look, because it's not in those other places. So the neuroscience shows us there's 4 core areas that are responsible for emotional activity in the brain. The most important part of that is the fear in the orange on the left. And if you read my book, you'll understand how important I think fear is in understanding emotion. In fact, I think it is the only emotion but we can see by more respected researchers that there are actually 4, even though I still consider fear to be the primary, or at least the initial emotion. So the fear response is triggered off in the amygdala, which is that orange little circle near the bottom of the subcortical area. So fear is the amygdala. What happens in the area just above, called the insula in the green, is the disgust response. So what we have in the brain is a negative surge of emotion always before positive. So we always feel negative before we feel positive. It happens to us even when we think about it. Third area to focus on, Anthony and everybody else, is that of anger. And anger is an emotion that is quite cognitive, not necessarily quite lucid, but it's got some cognition pattern. That's why it's got some function in the cortex area, as has sadness, which is often areas that have some cognitive association, but not necessarily. However, what is important to understand about this, everybody, is that what happens when these emotions trigger off. The simple science, from a behavioral point of view, shows that the brain tells the face before the mind notices what's going on. For example, if you have a shock, or if you have a surprise, or if you have a fearful event, or if you're disgusted by something, your face tends to respond before you even consciously notice what's happening. Does that make sense, Anthony?
Makes perfectly good sense, because a lot of things happening neurologically that in the brain and the mind are 2 separate things.
Exactly. So we're going to stay away from the difference between the brain and the mind for a little bit, because it's one of those conversations that is a rabbit hole. And my opinion is very concrete on this, but I'm happy to hear more about it. But let's just stay away from the brain, the mind, and let's just agree that the brain is the machine, the brain is the vehicle, and the mind is the driving. The brain is a noun, the mind is the doing, is the adjective, or the verb, or whatever. What's okay. So Anthony, the activity that I'd like to do with the people in a second is help them identify which face is which emotion. Okay, are you ready? Okay, so Anthony, what I want you to do is I want you to ask people to write top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. Okay. So people are all, so are you with me? You're on mute, Anthony. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, so if people, you want them to write in their chat screen.
Yeah, so everybody, what you're going to have to do, let me just take this away so you can't cheat. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do is to select which emotion is linked to which face. So there's 4 blue words on the left, and there are 4 faces next to them. So what I want you to write is sad, top left, disgust, bottom right, etc., etc. Okay, so Anthony, the game for everybody is for the first person to give all the right answers, they're going to win a seat on the Brain Hack for Innovation program. Okay, so
all right, we have one answer. Do
okay,
you want to show that picture again?
So tell me what you understand about the game, just so that I understand if you understand.
You want us to identify which emotion is associated with which picture.
Yeah, and how would you write that in the chat group?
So there's some examples. I don't know if you can see the chat screen.
So what you must do is you must write the word sad, and then you must write bottom right, top left, or whatever.
Yes.
Okay, so we're all ready.
Yes.
Okay, and you can't play, Anthony. You've got to only be the judge. Okay. Okay, so everybody, we're going to play this for a minute. If nobody gets it right, then so be it. And let's see how we go. So everybody, so pick a word, top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. You've got to pick one per each and write 4 sentences. So here we go. Okay, so there we go. So pick your faces and link it to the names.
So with 100 people, that might be a lot of entries.
Well, I mean, we're only looking for the first one,
Yeah.
Anthony. So
We already have several, so.
We've got another 30 seconds to go.
Okay.
And is there any way of us having a private chat? I don't think there is there?
No, I think in interest of keeping everyone engaged, it'd be best if we don't.
Yeah, it is okay.
If you want to tell us the correct answer, then I can tell you.
Okay, okay, so the correct answer is top left is fear, top right is anger, bottom left is disgust, and bottom right is sad.
All right, so the person who entered that exact answer first was Nancy Shea.
Nancy, congratulations! Yahoo, Yahoo! Welcome. Hope you'll use your ticket wisely and have some fun with me on the program that follows. But so well done. That's really cool. I hope there was lots more that got it right. What the behavioral neuroscience shows is that you can actually influence these states, and they have a direct to how open and creative the brain is available to process information. For example, on the next slide, we can see that if you take that fear, you can trigger it into a state of surprise. So when the fear becomes less negative, surprise opens up and it makes it more engaging. The disgust can turn into happiness, and there can be a sense of emotional positivity associated with the activity. So the link between innovation and neuroscience shows that you can adapt the people or even your own perception so that you get a more creative headspace. Does that make sense, Anthony?
Yes, I'd like to hear more about how we adapt to that.
Yeah, there's a lot of how.
We want to develop empathy for the people we're innovating.
We're going to get to that in a second. It's a great point. So in terms of building empathy, it is first being able to identify those people's facial triggers so that you can know what kind of person is going on, so that they are giving away their facial secrets. So that is the first part of it, is being able to identify. And there's a few more facial affect coding that's important to know. But just for the sake of this call, let's just keep it simple. So the first part in developing an empathetic environment is to build a safe space. So there is a lot of work around psychological safety. Have you come across that phrase, Anthony?
Yes.
So Amy Edmondson at Harvard is doing some incredibly interesting work. And in relation to her work, the area of Matthew Lieberman's in social neuroscience is showing that if you encourage an environment to be risk-taking by being safe, you cause an increase in the amount of oxytocin, which makes people feel more trusting. And if that happens, empathy precedes it. So you get safety by building empathy in place. That's the first part. I hope that's making sense. The second part in building an empathetic space for innovation is to link risk to motivation and achievement. Okay, so let me just explain this a point. So you need to motivate people to take risk, and you need to reward them for achieving against those. So what do you want, what the research is showing us, that if you encourage people to take risk, they feel more excited, they feel more daring, they feel more bravado. And when that happens, you see a relation between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, where the emotion feeds the thinking. And what happens is that causes a state called cortisol coordination. Now, cortisol is the hormone for stress, or at least allostatic loading, as it's known academically. And if you use that cortisol effectively, it becomes like Red Bull, or it becomes like coffee. I mean, if you overdrink it, you end up getting exhausted, ending up with liver problems or whatever. But if you use it effectively, you get people to be excited and challenged to take risks if you've got the safe place first in place. Does that make sense, Anthony? Are you following? Okay, does that all hold together?
Yes, I'm following.
Okay, wonderful.
And I mean, I like where you're going with this, because, I think about when we're trying to research people and understand for innovation. And I think it is important, like you said, to get them in a safe place where they feel safe.
Mm.
And so that away from places that might be stressful to them, or they feel unsafe, or, that's why it's sometimes good to get people away from their work environment, for example.
Exactly.
Into a laboratory or a creative space, coffee.
Exactly.
And at the same time now motivate some risk and the reward. And I love the chemistry that's going on.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. The third part is probably the most important part, is that you need to reward people even before the results have been achieved. So I call these mini milestone rewards. What happens in the brain is that when success has been achieved, after you've been for a run, or after you've got feedback for making a great meal, or whatever the success has been, you get a dopamine reward. The reward pathway, the dopamine pathway, gives you a flood of hormones, and you feel good. You feel a bit better than you did beforehand. And during the innovation process, if you put little milestones of reward in place, it further motivates people to take more risks. It further motivates the place to be safe. So you have like this wheel going on where safety feeds risk, feeds motivation, feeds rewards, feeds motivation, feeds safety. So you can see how you build a little container around building an empathetic environment where people feel safe and motivated to be innovative together.
Okay. And some people are asking some questions. So just to clarify.
Yeah, sure.
What type of risk are we talking about here? I mean, how much risk? Are you asking them to go out and be extremely risky, or just a little risky, or?
I mean, the risk here is we're talking about psychological risk. We're not talking about, light the fuse kind of risk. We're not speaking about that. We're speaking about psychological risk of, saying, right, what do you guys think about ABC? Are you with me, Anthony?
Mm-hmm.
So it's about that.
That makes sense.
It's about that emotional risk.
Yes, that makes sense.
Hey guys, I know you all think that iPhone's a great name for the new product, but how about my phone? And everyone says, oh no, my phone, bad name. But if you have that safety in space, people take more risks, and you get to be more successful in achieving. And when you reward people for taking those risks, you just escalate the power. So if you don't have empathy in place, you don't connect and feel safe, you got a no starter. You're just not going to get out the blocks.
Actually, you make a good point too, because if you do this on a one-on-one basis, the chemistry and the psychology and everything happening is different than if you do it in a group setting where there might be peer pressure or group dynamics.
Exactly. I mean, the social neuroscience shows that in a group environment, even in this environment, everybody's stress levels pumps up. Mm-hmm. Speaking to you one-on-one is much easier than speaking to you within a group. So what I did is I've tricked my brain to have a conversation with you, so it doesn't feel so stressful, because presenting is tough work on the ego. Right. So even if you know your stuff, you never know what might go wrong. So that's why I'm sharing the load with you, Anthony, if that's okay.
That's very good. No, but you're right. I mean, conversations are much more of a safe space, if you will, than are presenting. So if you can, I think if you're researching people for innovation and you get them into a place that's conversational, rather than them having to, put on a show for a group, certainly is much more of a safe space. So they're going to enjoy much more of the oxytocin in a situation like that,
Exactly,
and a little bit
exactly.
less of the cortisol.
I mean, what is interesting is that oxytocin, you can actually artificially infuse it through the air conditioning. So you can get a pump of oxytocin, but it doesn't really last that long. So people leave feeling okay, and quickly after that, they feel less than happy. So I'm looking at the time, Anthony, and just in respect of everybody, if anybody's really rushing out of time, we are recording this call, but if anybody really wants us to speed up, please drop a note, and Anthony will then shake my tail. So let me keep going, if that's okay.
Very on.
So we're now on to section 2. We've now covered empathy, hopefully enough. We're now looking at the neurocircuitry of creativity and imagination. And in this section, everybody, we're going to look at what is neuroplasticity and what is the neurocircuitry of creativity, and what are the 4 types of neural circuitry that are associated with creative insight. So the brain seems to function in 4 categories in the way circuitry around creativity occurs. So the first part is to understand neuroplasticity. Have I discussed this with you before, what neuroplasticity is, Anthony?
Not in detail. So
Well, I won't do it much detail now because it'll just get too exhausting. But the simple research findings have shown that the brain is not fixed. The brain has flexibility. It can join new dots. It can learn new languages. It can reboot itself. And that was the reason for the title of my book, because I had to do some serious rebooting of my brain after the coma. But it's not like there's an especially complicated thing that I did over and everybody else. Everybody has this opportunity, but it takes a bit of intent, a bit of focus, a bit of muscle to keep with the discipline. So the way that this works in neuroplasticity is that it gives you opportunity to have new ideas, to join new dots, to see how things are joined together. One of the myths that people often refer to creativity is being left or right brain-sided, left or right hemisphere. You can see that diagram, Anthony.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever heard that? Left brain people are mathematical.
Certainly.
So that is a myth. Otherwise I wouldn't be denigrating it, but there is some truth to it if you understand what is creative and what is scientific or mechanical or arithmetic or arithmetic, mathematical. What's being found is that the left hemisphere is better at drilling down at details. The right hemisphere is better at looking at the stars and seeing the connections. So if you think of the left hemisphere as a microscope and the right hemisphere as a telescope, you get to understand where the artistic and scientist metaphors came from. Obviously, both sides of the brain are used for all activities, but there tends to be a tendency, as I described, to be a microscope and a telescope, if that makes sense. So in the way that this functions, there's 4 mechanisms going on. There's 2 process mechanisms and there's 2 information mechanisms. So the 2 process mechanisms in creativity are deliberate process and spontaneous process. In the information mechanisms, there's 2 types. There's an emotional information and there's a cognitive information. So those are the 4 categories. Does that seem to make sense? Yeah?
To some degree.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So the research shows that if you look at this little matrix, I've made some little simple icons to help people understand it. So if you look in the gray blocks, it says the information and the process types. So we've got those 2 categories, and then subcategories of the process. Sorry. sorry, the two types of process are the spontaneous process and the deliberate process. The information is the emotional type and the cognitive type of information. Okay, so let me ask you a quick question just for fun, Anthony. So if you were a deliberate and cognitive thinker in the way that you're innovative, which block would you be in?
The bottom right corner.
Yes, very good. So let me now show everybody how this works, okay? So it's a bit of a big slide, and I can't make it smaller. Anyway, let's just keep going. So we can see it. Can you read that okay, Anthony?
Yes, just fine.
Okay, so if you look at the slide, you were Edison in your answer. The deliberate and cognitive kind of creation is that structured, systematic thinking, deliberate and cognitive. Okay. Whereas in the type B, the deliberate and emotional would be more like Freud's innovation. We're looking at emotion, understanding how you can deliberately understand an emotion to come to some kind of innovation. Psychoanalysis was his innovation, as you will probably heard of that. So Freud would be in the bottom left, where the blue arrow and the purple circle. Okay. If someone was using a type C for creative, they would be spontaneous and emotional. This is what Newton's aha moment, where he was incubating this idea, and all of a sudden, spontaneously, out of nowhere, this apple fell on his head, or whatever the story, the mythology goes, and spontaneously had this emotional outburst, aha, eureka, or whatever, however it goes if you're sitting in a Greek bath. But the thinking around the type C is it's something that just pops, and this is the light bulb moment that people usually refer to. So the type C is in the top left-hand corner, where it's spontaneous and emotional. The type D is where it is spontaneous and cognitive in the top right. So this is something like Buddha's epiphany sitting under the tree. And he had this epiphany, this worldview, this belief that he had to share. In the same way, Jesus had this need to share his spiritual enlightenment. I mean, it's quite popular in religiosity, but it's not exclusive for that. You have this idea and you need to action it. So of these four types, which kind do you think you are, Anthony?
Probably type A, more like Edison.
Well, you'll be happy to know that what you think you are is normally not right, okay? Because the ego gets in the way of the emotion, and the emotion messes with the cognitive attention. So what we're going to do at the end of this is share the type ABCD neuropsychological assessment to help people understand what kind of innovative brain they have.
So
Are you like?
yes, and I see you shared here in this slide which areas of the brain are
Yes.
involved in this.
Mm-hmm.
So is this to somewhat say that we are inherently, our brains are inherently wired one way or the other? And you entered this talking about neuroplasticity.
Mm-hmm.
So you're probably going to connect this back to neuroplasticity and how this can evolve.
Yeah, you're stealing my thunder, but anyway, thank you for that. The point here is that in the brackets, I've put some of the areas and the functions. So under the type A, there's a strong focus on working memory, which is basically the function that you would have when you're playing chess. It's the holding of ideas at mind and manipulating them, trying to make sense of them. And that is predominantly a function of the prefrontal cortex, the PFC. So neurologically, that's what happens. All of these areas can be improved, just like you can learn a new language or playing the piano or the fool or whatever you want to do. But these are the areas that tend to be lit up when the different kinds of innovation is going on. So you can school your brain to be in any of these quadrants. People have a different bias, and everybody has a different bias. Every brain has its own signature, its own handwriting, but these are the categories. As we can see in Freud's type, we can see that the cognition in the prefrontal cortex then drives the emotional state. So thinking first, emotion follows, which is very difficult to do because it's normally exactly the other way around. Okay. Is that clear, Anthony, or should I say that again?
No, what people want to know is, can we easily shift ourselves from one to the other, or is it a lot of effort to shift from one to the other?
It is easy and hard. It is simple, not difficult. There's an interesting conversation, is that understanding it is pretty simple. I mean, it's not complicated stuff, but when you're under stress, when you're in a group environment, when you have targets and deadlines and requirements and organizational issues, it gets very difficult. So we all could probably pick up a pen and write with the other hand, but we could write our name. But it would take a lot of practice for us to get good at using the other hand. The brain isn't that digital. We can obviously flip between sides. What is important, however, Anthony, is to understand the group's style.
Mm-hmm.
Because individuals, find the days of individual invention is pretty much over, and it's up to teams and organizations to do the creativity. So part of the process to understand your own, but also understand how that fits into a team or an organization environment, so that you're not a round peg in a square hole, or whatever the analogy goes. So the thinking here is to make sure that you are context relevant.
Yeah. To that point, the question is, to be most innovative, should we really focus on our own natural approach, what we're suited to, or should we try to develop ourselves from a full brain and try to use all four quadrants as an individual?
I mean, it's such a difficult question to answer. There's two ways of going to balance it. Do you want to be a generalist or a specialist?
Right.
So the answer is in that question, I hope.
Well, I think to your other point, inherently we as individuals are attuned to one particular approach. Therefore, what we do is we tend to build teams or groups. And as a group, then we are as a group. Correct?
And this is the problem that I'm speaking about around that psychological safety. So if you are a deliberate and cognitive thinker and you're in an environment where everybody's spontaneous and emotional, you're not going to get a word in. All these people are going to be jumping around and you're not going to be able to share your insight. So that nothing creative will be birthed from your input. So if you don't have that empathetic relationship for different styles of creativity, the team structure breaks down. So it's so important to have this architecture in place, if that makes sense, Anthony.
Yes, it does.
So let me just quickly finish on the type D on the Buddha brain. It's about looking at the exact opposite of Freud's brain. It's about having this emotional experience and then translating that into a conscious cognitive process. So from the amygdala into the prefrontal cortex, if that makes sense. What I haven't done, which would have gone too busy for the slide, Anthony, is to associate the neurotransmitters with the neuroanatomy. And that is part of what we'll cover in the full program. But just for the moment, I think it's enough just to give that. I hope that's clear enough, and we can move on.
There's a lot of neuroanatomy. We don't have time to get into it today.
Yeah. So the neuroanatomy and the neurophysiology are two parts of information that are not very useful. They are useful, but they're not very useful. What is very useful is the application of that. So having a little tool like this, so you can do an assessment. You don't really need to know the basal ganglia and all that stuff. You just need to know that it has an application, and it's informed by academic neuroscience.
All right, very good.
Okay, great. So we're going to move on now to a very important part of the task. We're going to do something around storytelling, but before we do that, I need to see how well people are concentrating, Anthony.
Okay.
So is this
I'm still awake.
so let's just see. I mean, I won't know if you are paying attention unless you tell me. So I don't know, we'll have the time to everybody to answer, but let's just show you how this is going. So we're going to play a game, okay? So Anthony, I can see your hands, and we're going to make a brain with our hands, okay? So what I want everybody to do, I want you to start with your hands wide open like this, and I want you to put your thumbs in the middle, close your hands over, and put your hands together. So that is basically the size of a brain. Slightly bigger if you're feeling Einstein, because his brain was quite big apparently, but size doesn't matter as we're all told by so many people. And the point around the brain is that this is a brain. So let me just show you which parts of your brain are going on. The little finger, wave your little finger, Anthony, wave your little finger. That is your prefrontal cortex, okay? So that's the smallest finger, and it does the most work when it comes to innovation. The second finger are the index fingers, and they point to habits and to routines and things we have normally in place, okay? So cerebellum pointing to habits. Prefrontal cortex, smallest, but doing the most work. The most influential in the middle of the brain is the amygdala, okay? And the amygdala has the emotional responsibility. It's important to remember that the brain is first an emotional machine before it is anything else. We need to get out of the way. We need to use fear to not get killed by the saber-toothed tiger and everything else. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show you how to unclutter your brain so that you can make sense of the rest of the presentation and use neuroscience effectively. So what I'd like you to know is that the brain is a system that controls the left, controls the right, and the right controls the left. So the right side controls the left, and the left controls the right. So I want everyone to flip their hands over like that. Okay, perfect. Now I want you to lock your hands together so that you have made a brain. Okay, have you got that?
We all have it.
Okay, so now I want everybody to feel inside their hands and see which thumb is on top, and make sure that the left hand's thumb is on the bottom of the right hand thumb. So if your left hand is on top, make sure that your left thumb is on top. And as you do that, open your hands and straighten your arms. Okay? So straighten your arms. Straighten your arms. And now what I want everybody to do, I want you to unwind and get your brain in track. So see if you're listening now, unwind your arms. Okay, you're not allowed to undo your hands, Anthony. But anyway, you got the point.
I failed your test, I believe. I fear.
So it's a useful activity to show people how to hold their attention. And will unbundle how the activity works in a bit. But it's a useful exercise to show you how simple yet complicated behavioral neuroscience is, to help you unbundle complicated problems. But that's a little fun activity. So let's now use that story to understand storytelling. Are we okay to move on? Is that okay, Anthony?
That's good. Moving on.
Okay, so now we're into storytelling and to understand what makes the brain like a good story. So storytelling was the first thing that allowed us to learn. It's the way that information was passed down generations. Storytelling wasn't necessarily a linguistic function, but it might have just been a ritual or a dance. But storytelling is an archaic form of understanding to the brain. And in terms of understanding, the storytelling isn't in the right but the left hemisphere, the neurolinguistics shows that we are hardwired to love a good story. We like a good beginning. We like a journey, which we know the structure, and then we like an exciting, surprising ending. So the beginning of this presentation was good. You know, you spoke about me and the neuroscientist and the coma, and that was, people got their attention. Then I put the structure together, had some little exciting things on the way, and now we're going to see where the story of storytelling about the brain influences people's understanding of storytelling within the neuroscience. So I hope that isn't too confusing. But the thinking around storytelling is that it makes us feel connected. The brain is a very systematic machine when it comes to storytelling. The brain has three areas called the language loop. The first to refer to is Broca's area. And when I was recovering from my coma, I couldn't say things. My Broca's area was damaged. And one of the stories, actually, I'll stay away from the story of it because it gets so complicated on how difficult it is to say the words. I remember once in the therapy, the therapist asked me, what sound does a cat make? And I said, moo. And they said, no, a cat. And I said, no, it really is moo. And she said, no, it's meow. And I said, no, moo and meow rhyme together. So my cognitive skill justified my Broca's error. So when telling a story, you need to make sure that the information lands right in Wernicke's area so that it is heard and understood. So what you're saying is only relevant if it is understood by what is being heard. And the trick to that loop is Gershwin's territory, which kind of bundles it together. So make sure that there's a dialogue in the story. Stories aren't one way. They are a dialogue between the listener, between the person hearing the story, and also between the journey. So the journey between the Broca's area and Wernicke's and the territory in between of Gershwin's shows us that a story is a dynamic, organic product. And what we've noticed in this process is that if you understand how the brain wants to understand stories, knowing this language loop, you can have better insight in how to be creative in storytelling. Most people have an understanding around how stories work, I'm sure, because it's become a very popular topic. And this part was simply to show you the neuroanatomy of relevant storytelling. And what is interesting is how that process ties into the hero's journey, which is a very good model for understanding the architecture of storytelling and how it links into behavioral neuroscience. So the link here is with the innovation, the GI&I little icon and the brain, and in the middle is back to the type ABCD neurocardiac test. So what we originally did with this test is that we were doing some research at Harvard and worked on a type D test. Now, the type D test shows that if you are a type D personality, you show a very, very high risk of having cardiac disease. So much so that people with this personality type are actually sent into psychotherapy for managing their cardiac health. What we've done with this model is we've built a type ABCD around innovation. So not to discuss your cardiac health, but to discuss your creative health, to discuss what are the kinds of types of thinking that will improve the results, what will improve the kinds of results you're wanting to have. And again, it's so important to have this understood within a social context. We are social beings. we need to be empathetic. We need to be connected. We need to see and hear the story, and we be able to join the dots and understand how things hang together. So people can find the test on my website, but more importantly, Anthony, I'm kind of keen to start rounding up now and just asking people any questions and sharing the next steps. But on your side, maybe there's a couple of questions around the brain hacks and the innovation model that I've been discussing, or anything else that's coming up for you, Anthony.
There's a number of good questions that have come up that I'll share with you. And just to recap for everyone, we've gone through 3 areas. Number 1 was developing empathy, because in innovation it's very important to begin the process, begin the journey with developing empathy for those who are trying to innovate for, so we can understand their needs, especially their unarticulated. Then we get into creativity. How does the brain work in that, so that we can come up with great new ideas for new innovations that meet the needs we discovered while we're being empathetic. And finally, once we have those innovations, we want to communicate those innovations and articulate the new innovation in a way that speaks to the needs that people have, and thus the storytelling. So this is all, these 3 phases work together, and it's very fascinating to learn how the brain actually as a machine fits into all this. So going back to storytelling, Professor, one of the questions was, there's been a lot of research that suggests some people are visual learners, and so the visual element, not just the neurolinguistics per se, but the visual element can emphasize or augment that a lot. Can you speak to where the visual part fits into that?
So all stories are visual, even if you're not specifically seeing and even you're reading an audiobook. The mind needs to have the occipital nerve attached when we are making sense of things. So there is some research saying that some people are visual learners, some people are not. I'm slow to listen to that research because it hasn't been very well covered in meta studies. But we all are visual learners. We all are auditory, kinesthetic, sensory motor, etc., etc. The point here, Anthony, is that the brain is very dependent on the occipital nerve in the eyes. There's a very strong, even stronger than most other senses, other than smell, which we can speak about at another time. So innovation needs someone to see the light, to have that creative insight. It's highly important in the innovation process.
Exciting how occipital nerve help to tell the story.
So you broke up a little bit in the middle, Anthony.
I said, does exciting the occipital nerve help to tell the story?
It definitely does. And just by using visual words in the story helps a person imagine. It helps a person build a picture so that they can start to build a model. Even for non-visual or non-tactile products, it's important to have a visual.
Yeah, and I think that, nice things in innovations. Actually, you can use too many visuals, because I think you want to leave a lot of it to the hearer's imagination. And so I often enjoy listening to an audio story more than a video story, because the audio story depends on me using my own imagination to envision what's being told rather than it being given to me. So I think sometimes the audio story can elicit more imagination in the hearer's mind, totally visual story. But I think there's a great use of both of those.
I mean, everyone's probably heard this quote before, and they said, I read the book and it was great, and the movie was such a disappointment. They got all the characters wrong.
Right. Because it was all predicated on how they had imagined.
Yeah. So you build your own version of reality. And that's what the brain likes to do. The brain loves to be creative. Give it the space and it'll go off and build a temple in the sky.
Absolutely. So I think for innovation, it's almost important to elicit people's own imagination than to give it all to them. So I think you're absolutely right.
If you give it to them, there's no space to be creative. Yeah. If you want people to innovate, you need to give them a safe space to take risks and motivate them during the process, so that you get that dopamine reward.
We love that.
You get those milestones of controlling the cortisol, and you get that psychological safety environment, which the oxytocin builds a happy
Yes.
tribe.
Okay, moving on to another question.
Yes.
Where does the subject of emotional intelligence fit into what's going on in all this with our brain?
So my opinion is that emotional intelligence is the be all and the end all. However, it should have been called feeling intelligence,
Okay.
because my research, and you can read my book if you want to hear the long version, but my research has shown me that the only emotion that the brain produces is fear. Other researchers would say that, okay, there's a couple more, but fear is the first emotion. There are, however, a flood of feelings that can follow. So feelings are conscious and psychological. Emotion is neurological and unconscious. So emotional intelligence as a broad brand, it's vital. It couldn't be more vital. If you can't control your emotions, they will control you.
Yes. So yeah, I appreciate making that distinction between emotions and feelings, and one being psychological, the other being more physiological, and
Right.
how we fit that in. So being aware of our being aware of those things. I'm not sure if I would say correctly aware of emotions versus feelings. One we can be more aware of. One happens almost autonomously. But being aware of where we are in those states certainly helps with being able to pursue this process better.
Yeah, so being aware of your feelings is very important. Being aware of your emotions, it's kind of impossible,
Yeah,
because the emotional response happens at least an eighth of a second before your prefrontal cortex kicks in.
it's an autonomous
So,
process. Yeah.
yeah, so anyway, but with neurology aside, it's simply vital that you have an emotional harness around the horse of the apocalypse
Yes.
in your emotional state.
Another question people are asking is, are there any open source websites and resources you would like to point us to learn more about this topic, or some good websites you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a flood of these. I'm trying to work out how to share. I don't know how to share in the chat group because I'm presenting. Um, anyway, I can't. But if you email, maybe you can write in the chat group. You can write a. Here we go. I found it. So I'm just writing here. I'm just writing an email. I'll send
Okay.
people. So if you email Sally, she will give you all these open source stuff. And um, I've also just recently completed a chapter for an academic textbook where there's some great case studies that are relevant to this. So yes, there's lots of great information. I think what's even more important than just the open source content, which will flood most people's brains, are the bite-sized brain hacks that help people build innovative systems. And in the course that we're going to speak about following this, Anthony, that's the core of the learning, giving people bite-sized, relevant, brain-based behavior change that
Okay.
is contextually relevant.
Yeah. So it is going on 1 o'clock, but to kind of wrap it up. So
Okay.
another piece you wanted to mention there about that? Why don't now would be the appropriate time to do it.
Okay, great. So the next part is looking at the brain hacks. So we're going to host 3 modules on empathy, creativity, and storytelling for 2.5 hours each, starting next Saturday for the following 3 Saturdays. So this series are looking at what are the brain hacks that help you in your context. So about making it specific to your environment and learning how behavioral neuroscience can be effective as per the 3 areas we've covered. So if anybody needs to hear more information, please send me an email or whatever they want to do. The regular cost of this work that I've done is $6.99 for the process. But because this forms part of our Genie protocol for next steps, Anthony, I'm happy to offer a discount. And for those who complete the process via Sally, before the end of the week. We're giving them a massive discount of $199. So the hope is that we can get a big population and we can test this as relevant for the Genie environment and how it might relate into the academic opportunities around the master's and PhD program. So my thinking is to make this process relevant to the individual context, rather than making you go to the brain, but bringing the brain to your context so that you can be innovative in that space. So that's my thinking, Anthony. The academic stuff is great, but it's not relevant to corporate and organizational professionals, which is my goal.
Right, yeah, you're right. I mean, and at Global Innovation Institute, our objective has always been to pursue applied innovation, what is practical and applicable and able to be applied inside of a business environment. We all, some of us, enjoy the academic discussions for the savoriness of it, but we don't know how to necessarily apply it. But it's certainly the beneficial thing in business is how do we actually apply this. So what I have done, I posted in the chat line here in the chat group the email. It's Sally at PROFKENNEDY.com. I've posted that email address there. So if you're interested in speaking further with Professor Kennedy about this or signing up for his courses, email Sally at that address there. She's his assistant and she'll get you all signed up. And you can also email him and ask for additional website resources and so forth to access there too.
Yeah, please do. We've done really well, Anthony. We're right on the hour, so high five. That was really well done, huh?
Any final closing comments as we wrap it up?
I mean, I think the final comment from mine is that taking the academic research and translating it into innovative tools within the business environment is a really key point of the work that I do. You know, getting stuck in the library is not fun. There is great stuff you can find there, but it has to be transferable. And that is what I'm interested about, our relationship and how we're working so well together, Anthony. And these brain hacks are going to be a good vehicle for people to make that relationship. I hope that sounds like something that's interesting for you as well.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to wrap it up. I appreciate your sharing.
Thank you.
Generously, Professor Kennedy. For those of you who may have joined late, this webinar was recorded, and the Institute will be sending out an email follow-up with a link to the recording that you can download and watch the webinar offline. Another time for joining us and participating. And until the next time, we'll see you then. Have a great and wonderful weekend. Goodbye.